I just want to say how pleased I am that Ann Dean could join us and kind of reprise. She did this photo essay with Humanities Kansas over the summer, and I think you all are going to find it really cool and interesting. And she's a great photographer as well. I'll let Ann kind of say more about herself, but I think the plan is Ann's got a video to show, and she can talk, and then we'll have a discussion conversation after that. Right, Ann?
Sounds good.
Okay, well, let me stop my screen share here, and great,
Okay,
now we can, yeah.
great. Um, Hello, everyone. Um, my name is Ann Dean, and I'm a photographer who lives in Lawrence, Kansas. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It's great to have you here. And I'm here to share with you a project that I did for Humanities Kansas. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just kind of start off telling you a little bit about myself as a photographer. This is my website, and it's broken down into many categories, as you can see. So I teach photography. I teach youth and adult photography at the Lawrence Arts Center virtually at the moment. But back when I was teaching in person, I was actually teaching a youth darkroom class as well as digital classes. And then I also teach adult digital photography through the Art Center. And I do private lessons. And so I've been doing that for many years, probably 15, 16 years. And then the other half is I'm a freelance photographer. So as you can see here, I do things like senior photos and family photos, weddings, headshots. I also work for the KU School of Business, the Dole Center, the Lawrence Public Library, places like that, doing event photography, which there haven't been many events lately. So I've been definitely doing more portrait work and that kind of thing these days. And I look forward to getting back into event photography sometime soon. Um, So I also do freelance work for Humanities Kansas, who are based out of Topeka. And they asked me to participate in their series this summer called The Big Idea. And sort of the reason they asked me was to sort of share why I decided to become a photographer. And so I decided to tell my story, not just as a photographer, but a little bit about my life, where I grew up, what shaped me into wanting to become an artist and a photographer, my inspirations, motivations, things like that. Um, so uh, I should, before I start the video, I should also say my heart is with travel photography. When I was young, I wanted to be a photographer for National Geographic, and the gallery showings and things like that that I do are more along the lines of travel photography. And I just did this Havana by Numbers virtual show. I used to live in Mexico, so I've got a show, had a show several years back called Color, Line, and Texture from Mexico. I did an Instagram 365 show at the Lawrence Arts Center a few years back. So that's kind of where my heart lies as a photographer. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to go ahead and start the video here. It's about 20 minutes or so. And afterwards, we can have a conversation. If you have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to share, I'm happy to talk with you. So I'm going to go ahead and start this and enjoy. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. And thanks to Humanities Kansas for inviting me to participate in this project. For more information about Humanities Kansas, visit their website at www.humanitieskansas.org or visit their Facebook page. Today I'll be presenting my photo essay, Images from the Mind of a Biracial Black Woman. I'm a photographer, a documenter, a storyteller, a silent observer. The art of photography puts you in a unique position to observe the world around you from a distance, to record flashes of life, fractions of seconds that have meaning to you and will go on to live forever. When I was very young, I realized the power of the still image. I remember seeing the breathtaking and haunting photograph of Florence Owens Thompson, The Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange, who became the face of the Great Depression. The Piercing Eyes of Sharbat Gula, the Afghan Girl by Steve McCurry on the cover of my mother's National Geographic. The desperation, the urgency, and the freedom of Gordon Parks' emerging man crawling out from the depths. These photographs stuck with me throughout my life like a great image does. The photographers brought us into the worlds of their subjects, and I wanted to know more. It is incredibly valuable to be able to stop for a moment, take a look at the world, appreciate the tiniest details, and capture them from behind the camera. The fleeting moments in life that we all take for granted and that give our lives meaning. To tell your stories from your own unique point of view that only you can see. This is why I decided to become a photographer. I was born in 1970 and adopted by a Black family in St. Louis, Missouri, who had already adopted a baby boy, my brother, 18 months earlier. My parents had a small 2-bedroom apartment in the city, but just before my birth, they decided to find a larger home with more space for their growing family. My father had been awarded the position of chief microbiologist at St. Louis City Hospital, so they were ready for a fresh start. They soon found a house on the north side of the city, very close to the county line, or what would soon be known as the suburbs. At the time, it was an all-white neighborhood where the unwritten rule was no Blacks after 6 p.m. unless they were domestic workers. As a result, they were petitioned by the residents who tried to block them from moving in. But my parents weren't having it, and they fought against what they called a line restriction. They felt that if they could vote in elections and go to war and fight for this country, which my father had done in Korea, then they deserved to live anywhere they pleased. So they didn't back down, and despite these actions, they moved into their new home, while at the same time, some of the neighbors moved out. This was the beginning of white flight in our area, and by the time I went to high school, our neighborhood would be almost entirely Black. When I looked into the faces of my family, Blackness is what I saw, what I've always seen. I'd never really known anything else. This was my identity, where I felt most comfortable and at ease. Although I knew deep down inside there might be something a little different about me. I was 5 years old when my mother told us of our adoptions and about my racial background. You see, I'm the product of a Black man and a white woman, which makes me biracial by definition. But in my heart and mind, I'm Black because my family is Black. So back then I shrugged it off. I knew who I was, and I never really questioned it until I went to school and I became socialized. My classmates would ask rudely, "What are you?" It always caught me off guard. What do you mean? I'm a human being, a citizen of the world, I would think. But they wanted a concrete answer. Even at that young age, race was an issue. And I learned that I would have to answer those questions for the rest of my life. The white kids would stare at my face, my skin. They would touch my hair, which still happens all the time. They asked me why I didn't talk black. The black girls teased me relentlessly. They called me white girl, high yellow, said I talked proper, and hated my so-called good hair. They wanted to fight me in the neighborhood, in the schoolyard. The mere sight of me made them irritated and angry. I could always feel it the moment it started, and I would immediately work to diffuse the situation. But I thought to myself, why were they saying these things? What was happening? Why did they hate me? I was a black girl too. Why couldn't they understand this? I was in between worlds on the outside. This was further proven to me when our parents decided that we would get a better education and more opportunities by entering into the City of St. Louis desegregation program. So starting in junior high, we were bused, as they say, to the all-white wealthy enclave of Clayton, Missouri, even though my stay-at-home mother drove us to school each day until we could drive ourselves. It was tough leaving the neighborhood and entering into this completely new world that I knew nothing about and couldn't believe even existed once I arrived. I was shocked by their lifestyle, the houses, the cars, the clothes, the money. Was this for real? Did people really live like this? But I adapted to my new environment, made friends, and I realized that the gap could be bridged, but it had to be done delicately. Tread lightly, don't be too aggressive, watch and learn. It was here at Clayton that I saw The Learning Tree by Gordon Parks, an African-American photographer, writer, director, and composer from Fort Scott, Kansas. It tells the story of a young boy growing up in rural Kansas and becoming a man at a time when racism was the norm and a part of daily life. The film was beautiful, heavy, tragic, and it left a mark on me. A couple years later, I would read his book, A Choice of Weapons, which would solidify my understanding of the power of the still image as an art form. In it, Park says, I picked up the camera because it was my choice of weapon against what I hated most about the universe: racism, intolerance, poverty. I could have just as easily picked up a gun like so many of my childhood friends did, most of whom were murdered or put in prison. But I chose not to go that way. I saw that the camera could be a weapon against poverty, against racism, against all sorts of social wrongs. I knew at that point I had to have a camera, he said. And so did I. These are just a few images from Gordon Parks' book, Segregation Story, where he uses photography to tell the story of the Jim Crow South. Gordon Parks documented the restraints, open and hidden, on an extended African-American family persevering in the segregated South. This image is called Outside Looking In, and I could definitely relate to that. My mother gave me my first camera for my birthday when I was in 8th grade, a Nikon L35 autofocus with attachable lenses, and I took it everywhere. She was a painter herself and always encouraged us to experiment with visual art, music, theater, anything that might interest us and spark our curiosity. I soon became aware that I could speak through the camera. I discovered a whole new world, and I realized that the camera does not lie. It expresses the truth of a situation, no matter what. I was obsessed with capturing the beauty of the world that often goes unseen. I understood the power that one single image could conjure, and I wanted to harness this power and learn how to be the best I could be at telling stories through photography. At the same time, though, I could stay out of the mix, and it felt so comfortable to be behind the camera. I began studying other photographers' work, paying close attention to the way they told their stories. Their images expressed feeling and emotion, pain, discomfort, fear, courage, beauty, love, joy, and truth. I was especially drawn towards the images from the civil rights photographers and how they were able to encapsulate the feelings of an entire movement towards social justice with only a few choice photographs. It was then that I really understood the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I moved to Lawrence, Kansas in 1988 and studied English at KU, but photography was never far from my mind, and I always had my camera with me to record my journey. I remember one college class that I took called The Black Experience in the United States Since Emancipation, which would be taught by a female professor, and I was excited. The room was crowded and the ceilings were low, but it was nice to see that the class was very split racially, which was rare, with white students, mostly from small Kansas towns who'd never met a Black person before, to Black students from larger cities who had little to no interactions with white people. It was tense. I would sit quietly and listen week after week to the arguments, to the frustrations and the prejudices that each group had towards the other. When I finally spoke up and tried to find some common ground, the professor called me a bleeding heart liberal and quickly dismissed my comment, which cut me to the core. I thought, how will we ever learn to understand each other if we cannot hear one another and try to come together in some way? And why does that make me a bleeding heart liberal? As if it were more comfortable to perpetrate the hate. It was discouraging, to say the least. There have been so many other experiences along these lines in my life, too many to count. What lies at the core of this? I think it's fear. Fear of what you do not understand, intolerance, and being closed off to learning something new about your fellow human beings. I also realized that my experience growing up was rare and that I wanted to share it somehow. So I started telling my own stories and showing people the world through my eyes and from my perspective. I learned to study social situations, to read the room, to blend in, and become a chameleon so that I could maneuver easily with my camera, no matter what company I was in. A silent witness, recording my observations about the world we all live in, straddling the line between black and white, not wanting to rock the boat. Going to school at Clayton each day and then back home to my neighborhood on the north side in the evenings had a profound effect on me. It helped me learn to adapt more easily to different settings, and it allowed me to be flexible within them. After I graduated from KU, I lived in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula for a short time, where I still visit most every year. This experience furthered my understanding of different cultures as I got to know the Maya people, who opened my eyes to many things and to different ways of thinking that I had never imagined before. They had a manner of being, a contentment that I hadn't experienced before. I try to travel as much as I possibly can to expand my horizons and to broaden my knowledge about this diverse world and its inhabitants. One of the most enriching travel experiences I've ever had was visiting Cuba for our honeymoon in 2002. To me, it was a photographer's dream. The Cuban people have very little and have put up with so much. Yet what they lack in material things, they more than make up for through art, music, and their general attitude towards life. It made me understand that all the stuff we think we need is just an illusion, and that life is about so much more. We loved it so much that we went back in 2017, and I'm sure I'll go back to visit again someday. The world we live in today is changing constantly, and with the pandemic we're currently living through, these are very uncertain times. Ironically, a disease that attacks the lungs while we are all shouting collectively, we can't breathe. There is still misunderstanding, ignorance, and violence in terms of race, and so many of the same wrongs are still being perpetrated today. Time seems to have stoked the flames of this fire somehow. And it's astonishing how these scenes echo the same images that we all saw from the civil rights demonstrations in the 1960s. How can this be? These are the children, the grandchildren, and the great grandchildren of the freedom fighters, still fighting for the same goals: justice and equality for all human beings here and everywhere in the world. This takes strength, tenacity, and courage. And it's inspiring to see young and older people today coming together and standing up for what's right, for a common good, for what we all deserve. We've come so far, but let's look honestly at where we still are and what we are doing as a people, as a country, and as these United States. Just a few days ago, I took a survey, and one of the questions asked what race I identify with most. Black and biracial were options. I am both. Yet I still identify as a Black woman, and I still consider myself to be a citizen of the world. But I also know where I come from and who I am, and nobody can take that away from me, not with harsh words, teasing, insults, or hate speech. And I will remain true to myself no matter what others think they see. These days, I teach photography to youth and adults at the Lawrence Art Center, and I run my own freelance photography business. Photography will always be a part of my life in some way, and I'll continue to tell my stories, seek out new subject matter, and expand on my viewpoints to see the world in my own unique way. And remember, it's never too late to learn something new about yourself and the world around you. So find something that you enjoy and that makes you happy, where you can express yourself and tell your own stories. In the final words of his memoir, Gordon Parks says, "Poverty and bigotry would still be around, but at least now I could fight them on even terms. The significant thing was having a choice of weapons with which to fight them most effectively." Your choice of weapon can take the form of a pen or a paintbrush, a trumpet or a drum, a microscope or a shovel, a saute pan or a wrench, a sewing machine, a blackboard, a book, your vote, your voice, or a simple conscious effort to be understanding, compassionate, and kind to the individuals around you. But what is most important is that we do have a choice. What will you choose? Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to Humanities Kansas. Thanks for listening, everyone, and watching. Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything to add? Thank you, Jeff Heidel.
Yeah, I agree. Jeff wrote a wonderful presentation. I agree with that. It's really thought provoking and I think powerful, and a lot of beautiful photos as well by you and by others.
Thank you. I thought it would be a good idea to include photographers who inspired me, and I love Gordon Parks. I just loved his work throughout his life, you know, and to also show, you know, some of the ideas that I work through photographically for myself. I mean, I do so much work in the freelance zone and in teaching that sometimes I forget to do my own work, you know, and that's one positive thing, if you could say any positive thing about what's been going on for the past year with the pandemic. It's been that I've been able to sort of concentrate on some personal projects that I've been wanting to get through to for years. So so that's great. Yeah, I just love Gordon Parks. I feel like, especially, you know, coming from the Midwest, living in a small town in Kansas, he just um, experienced so much and did so much with his life, and as a great inspiration to other artists, photographers. He was a photographer, a writer, a composer, a director. I mean, pretty amazing, pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I'd seen some of his photography, and then I found out that he directed a feature film, which I didn't know
Yeah,
initially, and then I was like, whoa.
you're right.
And actually,
Uh,
somewhere online, there, I know it's on the internet somewhere because I've looked at it, is a sketch, like a sketchbook that he made as he was planning out that film. He like planned it out shot by shot in his sketchbook. It was pretty interesting approach.
oh wow, no, I've never seen that before.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I'll have to find that and email it to you, and I'll email it to the group here too.
Great, great. Thank you for all of your comments too. I'm reading all of these as you come in. Jim Griggs said, I appreciated the street photography. I struggle with that. I do too. I love to do street photography, but it's really hard to respect your subjects and not take them for granted and sort of exploit them, which is where my Havana by Numbers project came into play. And it was really, if you don't mind me screen sharing again, it was really about trying to represent these people from Havana um, without always taking their image. I always find that the term take your picture is so true, because you really are taking someone's identity and then sharing it with someone else. And so I'm very aware of that. So I love the color. I love like decaying, crumbling things, textures and things. So I decided as I was walking around, like something like this, you know, I just love the way that that makes me feel when I see it, with the light, the texture, the crumble, the color, the decay, but it's still beautiful. A really interesting juxtaposition. But to have these places, these numbers, I mean, each one of these residences represents a person or a family. Um, and they're so unique to Cuba, um, from what I've seen and where I've traveled, that I thought this might be an interesting way to represent people without actually taking their image, you know. So that was my latest um, my latest show, which, evolved from doing street photography like this, and I loved this. I really love this picture. It's the only one I took on my phone. I brought my big camera and everything was great. But this one was one of those that was just passed in a split second. I took it and I liked it because you couldn't really make out their faces too, you know. Um, but I do, I now ask people if I can take their photograph, and I try to come up with a little something to pay them for doing this, because now I'm sharing it with y'all, and here they are being represented. So I want to be fair, but then there's these kinds of shots that you can take, that really tell a story without always having people in it. And when I teach, we always talk about portraiture and children, and how delicate of a situation that is, and sharing images of minors without permission. So I went down and I found the parents who were right, around the corner where these kids live. Um, anyway, and I also wanted to let you know that on the Humanities Kansas website, if you just look up the big idea and my name, there's all of this, text here, but I also included, let me scroll, sorry if this is dizzying. Um, I included a reading list and a watching list and a listening list, just in terms of music too. And then their photo gallery is there as well. So if anybody just wants to take a peek at more stuff, or that would be great um, to see you on there. And Humanities Kansas is just such a great organization. What are some of the projects I'm working on now? Asked Marianne. Thanks for the question. I'm actually working on a grant proposal at this moment. It's due in about a week and a half, and it's from Fuji, and it's called the Sony Alpha Female Plus Grant. And I had kind of two ideas in mind, but my idea is to take the theme of adoption and to put it out there for folks a little bit plainer, uh, to sort of understand the point of view of adoptees. So I have myself and my brother and a few other subjects that are willing to participate, and I'm just going to photograph them and items, ideas, places that pertain to photography. I'm sorry, that pertain to adoption and their story, and try to tell their story. I took a writing class last year at the Art Center, and this is a topic that I wanted to explore more. And I realized that there was an audience for it. People were very curious about the adoptee experience. So that's what I'm working on right now. So wish me luck. I might win the grant, but even if I don't, I'm going to go ahead with the project. So I hope to present it either at the Lawrence Art Center Gallery or one of the galleries in town once I get it together. So it'll also be kind of a photo essay format. And that's something that I really like. I like the photo essay. I used to teach that. Is the Art Center open now during COVID? It is, actually. The galleries are open. They do have some in-person classes, but a lot are online virtually. I think the preschool is even happening, and they're just being very careful and restrictive. But they always have wonderful shows at the Lawrence Arts Center. And I'll tell you, during the day, during the week, and on the weekends, there's nobody in there. So bring your mask and you can just kind of wander around the galleries, and there's always something interesting to see there. Yes.
Yeah. Wendy on Facebook asked, in teaching your classes, how have you seen photography being helpful as people cope with COVID?
Well, that's a great question. Photography is one of those things that is a solo activity. I mean, you take pictures of people, but you do it very alone a lot of times, which is kind of what I like about it. But it lends itself to virtual experience pretty well. And what I see is that people are able to get out and whatever it is that's in their head, they're in the class in the first place, so that they like photography, they want to learn more, but they're able to go out, take a walk, even take like a 30-minute walk around the house or the backyard or the front yard, and learn more about the camera and express themselves in some way. I had an intermediate photography class of past students this past fall, and we all did photo essays. And one that sticks out in my mind pertaining to your question was of a woman's aunt and uncle who are in a nursing home, and she couldn't go in and visit them. So she did this project through the window, and taking these photographs of them through the window, bringing family along to visit them, and sort of documenting their experience with COVID and hers at the same time. So it's been a really interesting way to express yourself. Another guy's was on sunsets, right? Another guy did a piece about his extended family, and something that I might have already said this, but I have more time because I'm not working as much. So I'm really able to dive into personal ideas and things I've been thinking about for a long time that I haven't been able to realize. So I see that with my students as well.
Yeah, Jim said photography really lets you make the leap from looking to seeing, and that's something that I've learned through these, since I started at the library attending these. It seems like photographers can, and really see in a different way.
Yes.
um, you talked about telling stories through photography, and maybe this is kind of philosophical, but I just wonder, like, because like taking a photo, it's like one moment in time. So like, when does the question is kind of, when does the storytelling happen for you? Is it in the moment when you take the picture, or when you're selecting from the photos you've taken to choose which ones to publish? Or
Good question. Both. I would say it's a little of both and all the time.
Mhm.
Sometimes I go into something with a clear idea of what I'm doing that I want to take a series of photos for. And sometimes I take one picture, and one picture says everything, and you sort of feel it in your bones when you get that one image. But a lot of time, when I got back from during my Havana shoot, I knew I wanted to take pictures. I didn't have that idea of the numbers, but as I started walking around the streets and realizing how unique all of these separate residences were represented, I thought, wow, what a great way to, talk about people and who they are. So it's like that idea sort of developed as I was shooting. And I knew I was going to be motivated by my subject matter because I'd been there before. And I knew that I liked that subject matter, you know. Um, so, it comes from both, but many times you have to just gather a lot of material if you have a specific idea in mind. And you get back to the drawing board, to the computer, and you really have to be a very serious editor of your work. Even it's like I always tell my students, cover your subject well. Well, then you get home and you have 50 pictures of one car. How do you edit those? So you really have to have a very discerning editing eye, and be kind of ruthless and cut stuff off, and that's when your gut really comes into play, and saying what feels best to me, what felt the best when I took the picture, and that kind of thing. And I saw the portraits uh, comment, Jim, and I've been doing some of those too. You saw one in the essay. Oh, she's a professional photographer in Nebraska. Oh yeah, and so you notice the portrait, and those have been great. And all the portraits I've been doing have been outdoors, masked, telephoto lens. I did one thing at the Lead Center for a piano player in their big pavilion. It was just the two of us, and I stayed far away. Um, but I take it pretty seriously, and uh, trying to protect myself. But obviously, all or most of you are interested in photography, and I really highly recommend just picking up the camera and going for a walk, whether it's around the house, whether it's in the backyard, whether it's around the block, whether you drive somewhere and go for a walk out to the lake, the woods. and just see what you find. You know, I always find, whether even you're with your cell phone camera, um, and oh, you'd like to see some of the pianist photos? Here, I'll show you. I just was working on those before. Let me find the one I really, really liked. And this is a perfect example of, I started and, you know, I had kind of this harsh light and she had her hair up in a bun and we were shooting and I just wasn't digging it. I wasn't feeling it, right? So I went to move my lights around and I looked back at her. I said, go around to that side of the piano. We'll try to do some other things. Did not mean to do this angle at all, but I ended up with this. And this is probably one of my favorite shots of the entire session. But it was completely unplanned. It was one of those things where I looked up at her and there she was, and she looked great. And she was framed great. You know, she looks a little more stiff here, right? But boy, things were firing on all cylinders here.
And I think were you meaning to share your screen? I don't
Oh
think.
yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry. So what I meant at first was, you know, I was doing these kinds of shots, which I wasn't really feeling them. She was doing okay, you know, and it takes a while for people to warm up to you, you know. And then this is what I accidentally came across. And it ended up being one of my favorite scenes of the session, but it was completely unplanned, you know. And I looked back and I was like, wow, that's a great scene. What do these lights look like? I took a test shot and I was like, wow, that's great, you know. And then, you know, she changed. We did try to do some more fun stuff, you know. But she changed and she said she really wanted to have some without the piano, right? So we moved to a different place and she wanted to have movement. She wanted to show her fingers. She wanted to show the dress. And I love this one. This is one of my favorite ones. I haven't edited these yet. So I'll edit out these scuff marks and stuff like that, maybe straighten it up a little bit. But it's very spontaneous. We did a lot of these to get the perfect shot, you know, but this was my favorite one out of those. And she became more and more comfortable. It's like when you're working with people, you have to get them comfortable. You have to get them feeling good, you know. And then we started doing some more. And another huge thing with photography is light, you know, and working with artificial light like this can be really, really tough. But I finally dialed it in to where I really, you know, find a real good one. Oh yeah, like these, right? And I was like, there we go. That's what I want. That first one, too harsh, too crazy. But you know, for the photographer as well as the subject, you have to play around with it, be willing to change quickly, but keep your subject comfortable, you know. And I really loved that one too. That was one that I really liked. And these were her final picks too. So we were really happy with that. Che Young Park. Che Young Park is her name, and she was fantastic to work with. So a few of those.
Cool.
My only indoor shoot since last March. So that was kind of fun to do.
Yeah. You know, I just wonder what was your experience like? Yeah, those were amazing. Thanks for saying that, Jeff. Great photo shoot, and
Thank you.
and,
It's
and
been a long time getting there. I'll tell you, it's a lot of work, especially to be a professional and compete. There were some good photographers in Lawrence, you know, and so you got to stay on your toes. Got to always have the good gear. Constantly updating my gear. Sorry, Sam, what were you gonna ask?
well, could you maybe say a bit more about your experience out taking protest photos of the Black Lives Matter protests and other protests? Like, kind of wondering how do you position yourself, you know, not only physically, but like in terms of, you know, you're part of the protest, you're documenting the protest, you know?
Um, Good question. I'm not part of the protest necessarily. You know, I believe I have my own set of beliefs, and but when I photograph, I am photographing, and I separate myself from what's going on, like the powwow photos that you saw that I took at Haskell, or the Black Lives Matter march at South Park in May. It's like I'm on the outskirts. I'm always circling, circling like a bird of prey or something, looking what's going on. What are these people doing? What does that t-shirt say? What is this group doing? What's that sign say? And if I see something, I didn't used to ask as much, but I ask now, because that's just where I am in my process, morally, with taking pictures of people and then using them. And I asked all the people that I took pictures of that were in that essay. I asked them about. But so, it's like when I go to Mexico, my husband and I will go to Isla Mujeres. That's where I did my color line and texture show. We'll be vacationing. We're on vacation, right? But we run a golf cart. He gets a little 6-pack of beer or something. And not to condone drinking and driving, but we are on a golf cart. He doesn't have very much, maybe one. And he drives me around. And when I ask him to stop, he stops. And I'm out of vacation brain and I'm in photography brain, right? And I don't turn vacation brain back on until I'm done with what it is I'm focused on in terms of what I'm trying to capture with my camera. So I turn myself on and off all the time photographically. And, as soon as that photo brain clicks in, I step back, I look, I stop engaging with other people around me, and I'm pretty focused through the lens, But it's hard because I want to participate sometimes a little bit more, but that's my personality. I keep myself. That's why I'm a photographer. I'm behind the the scenes, right? So it's hard for me to put myself out there in other ways because I'm used to being behind the camera, being the silent observer. I see Larry Lee's picture. I don't have children. What are their experiences with their racial identity? Don't have kids. And that would be interesting because I always thought about that. And what I would tell them in terms of that, obviously the truth, but what would they feel? I'm married to a white guy, so if I did have children, they'd be biracial again, obviously, because I am, but there's that. And so that's an interesting question. And I know a lot of biracial people and their struggle with their identity solely as biracial people. So you add an adoptee, you add that layer onto it, and it gets pretty weird. I do not know my biological people. I do know who they are. I should become a private detective because I figured that out. I was born in Missouri, which is a closed adoption state. And so I did a lot of digging. But a good question for another person, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's of course, now we have Vice President Kamala Harris, and before that, President Barack Obama. I don't. Maybe this is a little bit off topic, but
Okay.
maybe not. What have you thought about how they've kind of negotiated their biracial identities?
Very interesting. For Obama, that was very exciting, especially because his mom is from Kansas and everything. That was very exciting for Kansans. But when I think of Barack Obama, I think of a Black man, and I think a lot of people do, even though his mother is white. And I feel like that speaks to kind of the one drop rule. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but back in the day, it was like you have one drop of black blood and you're Black. They call it like octoroon, quadroon, and all of this. Very interesting way of thinking. But I thought Obama was very graceful and elegant in the way that he spoke about race, dabbled in it. I don't know if you guys ever saw the Bourdain episode, Anthony Bourdain, where Anthony Bourdain sits down with him in Indonesia which is where he lived also for a while. And, he sat down with the people on a little plastic stool and they had beers and, $2 noodle cups and stuff. And I loved how Obama was able to put himself there with the people so easily, while kind of sticking true to himself as a Black American man. But then, in his book, which I've only read snippets of, the first book, really getting into talking about his mother and appreciation for his mother, because she was the one who was there, and raised him. So Kamala Harris, I don't know as much about her, but she reminds me of myself when I look at her, because she's married to a white guy and she's, I'm so driven or anything, but she's very focused and driven. And I feel like I'm that way a lot. And it's just one of those things with those two. It's like race was never a question, that didn't really get in the way, if it ever really could get in the way. It was just like, I'm laser focused and this is what I want to do. And if I'm the first one to do it, well, bring it on, so very good examples, both of them in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Let me see. I should mention, we do have Choice of Weapons at Newton Public Library, and it's available to borrow.
Great
And
book.
yeah. And we've got at least two other books that are either, I think we've got another book by Gordon Parks that is kind of autobiographical, or I'm not sure. I'm struggling to remember what the title is, but I know that we've got 3 or 4 books by or about Gordon Parks that would be really interesting to dig into, and cool, amazing Kansan. Yeah, well, I think unless anybody has any last questions, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much. Yeah, and as Jeff says, we'd love to have you back sometime and love to see more of your work. I did put in the chat. Yeah, there's, and Ann put it again there. Check out her website. There's tons of photos there. It's a lot of fun to look through them all, and
there's a lot of stuff on there, so you can go down the rabbit hole pretty easily.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I haven't I have a hard time watching myself. Yes, Learning Tree, amazing Gordon Parks book and movie. The movie's so good. It just reminds me of being a young woman coming up as a photographer. But I don't like seeing myself on tape. And so that was a good experience. I only saw that back one time other than today. And it's been since, August. So, it was in shit. It's like, what would I do differently? How can I do it? It was really slow. I'm sorry it seemed so slow, my reading, but I appreciate the opportunity to get to present it again and talk about it and just share, I'm a born in St. Louis, but I've now lived in Kansas longer than I lived there. So I consider myself a Kansan and a proud Kansan. I like it here. I like Lawrence a lot. And I really appreciate you all being here.
Yeah.
The Parks
Yeah.
Archives, I have not been to WSU to see the Parks Archives. The Spencer has a cool collection that Spencer Museum at KU, that you can visit and go in and see. Obviously, well, they're not open right now, even though the art center is, but you can go in and like check out a whole folder of his photographs and look at them, which is really cool. But I'll make a note to do that when I'm feeling brave enough to see the Parks Archives.
Yeah, I just come one last question. Sorry, I know you're wrapping up, but
Okay.
on that photo essay, did you write the essay and then choose photos, or vice versa, or some of both?
Both. I think I wrote it more first, but I had an idea, like I was going to use some Cuba photos and some Haskell photos, but a lot of those black and whites, they were square format, really crisp and powerful. That's a photographer named Vivian Maier. And everybody, if you haven't looked her up, Vivian Maier, spelled Maier, I believe. Those I added at the very end because I was like, I need something else that will speak And I forgot about her, and I started looking through her archive, her work, and she is just amazing. And she's someone who wasn't a photographer while she was alive. She died before anybody even saw one of her pictures. And a kid found her negatives at a yard sale and had a show of them, post-mortem show. She's got an amazing story. So Vivian Meyer, if you haven't heard about her, there's a great documentary on her too. And but yeah, it's because of that writing class. I started writing, then they asked me to do it, and I was like, yeah. And I was an English major too at KU before I went photography.
Yeah, yeah. And one more shout out for Humanities Kansas. They do amazing stuff, amazing support for libraries too, including Newton Public Library with programs and with book discussions. So, woo, Humanities Kansas. Yeah.
Yay, Humanities Kansas, we love them.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ann. I guess we'll sign us off now, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody. And if you ever have any questions, you can get in touch via my website.
Yeah, awesome. All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.